Pakistan plaguing Afghanistan. It is treated. The Taliban government announced the arrest of
Chinese investments are at stake here. On the ground, we are tracking the evolving situation with my colleague Anas Malik, who's sending us daily ground reports.
But the diplomatic relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan is not at the ideal most time. Taliban men at the checkpost, they fired some shots as well in panic.
Plaguing Afghanistan.
The Taliban has taken responsibility for the killing of a comedian in the country.
Hundreds of districts in Afghanistan.
Taliban has been ramping up.
Needed to fight the Taliban alone.
Audio check.
Here's a WION ground report.
What time's the flight? I have a flight in about 3 hours, and honestly, I'm a bit scared and nervous. I don't know what this trip unfolds for me. I know there is something that is going to happen because that's what my gut feeling says, but what is it? I have no clue.
काबुल इंटरनेशनल एयरपोर्ट पहुंचने पर खुशामदीद। यहाँ का जहाज 33 सेल्सियस है और मुकामी वक्त दोपहर की 1:25 हो जाते हैं।
As Afghanistan turns into a global flashpoint, WION goes behind the headlines to bring you stories from the ground.
It was a quiet July afternoon in Kabul. From the airport, we entered a heavily fortified city, a city where an eerie sense of calm prevailed, as if it was bracing itself for chaos.
There's a general sense of insecurity here within Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan, they would want to resist an oppressive regime. They are all up for resisting an oppressive regime, and they say that they have full faith in their security forces to ensure the pushback of those militant elements, those who try to take over by force.
As U.S. troops began the withdrawal, boarding flights from Kabul, outside, in other parts of the country, the Taliban mobilized. The group had set up dozens of checkpoints, some temporary and some permanent, along the country's main roads. The Taliban was still visibly powerful even after 20 years of war. The Afghan security forces too fortified major cities in an attempt to thwart the Taliban's advancement.
The security forces right behind me here in Kabul are of the opinion that they would want to fight until their last breath.
हमारा मोरल बहुत अच्छा है क्योंकि ये तो 20 साल से चल रही है लड़ाई वगैरह 20 साल से चल रही है जब अमेरिका भी था तो यही लड़ाई था.
The U.S. withdrawal had picked up steam. Earlier in July, the U.S. forces also vacated the Bagram air base, slipping away in the middle of the night. Bagram, the heart of American power in Afghanistan, turned into a ghost town.
This place used to be the biggest operational US base against the Taliban. This also, at one point of time, used to house more than 1,000 US troops in Afghanistan. The radar that you see behind me, the staircase, and this very parking sign, it is the place where jets used to be parked, but this now wears a deserted look.
The Taliban had begun an assault on major Afghan cities like Kandahar and Herat.
The valleys that you see behind me have been attacked by the Afghan Taliban. There is use of weaponry as you can hear. Rockets have been flying in, as what I've been told from the ground forces. You can see the amount of firing that has been done in order to push back the Taliban. The Taliban seem to continue their offensive. This time, they have now attacked the city of Lashkargah, the capital of Helmand.
The Taliban had its initial targets set. They were the city of Lashkargah in Helmand province, Kandahar, the birthplace of the group, and the province of Ghazni. While they moved swiftly in these provinces in the southern part of the country,
plenty of police and army convoys on the roads in Hummer vehicles like these in a bid to protect and guard the city. I'm standing at the main city chowk of Wardak, which is known as Wilayat Wardak. One cannot move without any security in order to report from here.
the east was also at risk. By the 2nd of August, 3 out of 5 districts in the Langman province had been captured by the Taliban.
From Kabul towards Laghman, you'd find plenty of these Afghan army Humvees stationed at corners. These mountains are taken as a cover by the extremist terror outfits because they come down from the mountains, they attack the security forces, they try to overrun the territories.
The Doha negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban, at the insistence of the United States, were far from what they hoped to achieve, a peace deal. On August 6th, the Taliban had seized their first provincial capital, Zaranj, the capital of Nimruz province that borders Iran. The city fell without a fight as most Afghan soldiers fled the scene. The next day, another provincial capital fell. Herat too was on the edge. By August 8th, Afghan forces had lost control over 3 more cities in the north. With each passing day, more and more major Afghan cities began falling like a house of cards. And the Taliban inched closer to the Afghan capital. Amid the chaos, Biden doubled down on withdrawal, saying that he does not regret his decision.
It's time for American troops to come home. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me. But we're going to continue to keep our commitment, but I do not regret my decision.
By August 13th, the Taliban overran Afghanistan's 2nd and 3rd largest cities, Kandahar and Herat. Lashkargah in the southwest had also fallen. The fall of Kabul began to seem all but inevitable.
Alhamdulillah.
Sensing the circumstances, the United States decided to send additional troops to help evacuate diplomats, civilians, and Afghans who helped the administration. Other international embassies also planned to shutter their doors.
Mazar Sharif was used to be considered as one of the most safest cities in the entire country after Bamiyan, but since yesterday we've seen a renewed offensive being launched as well by the Afghan Taliban. These are the areas behind me are those which are controlled by the Taliban. The military.
By the morning of August 14th, Mazar-e-Sharif in the north had fallen, and by the night they were just a few kilometers away from the seat of the Afghan government.
I'm standing in Pulema Bukhari. The area behind me, if my camera person can follow as well, these are the undeclared or unmarked boundaries that are that of the Taliban. The roadblock that you see, that is marked. That is a territory that is marked, that is that is assumed of the Taliban. You can hear there is intermittent firing that is ongoing.
The next morning, August 15th, 2021, changed the fate of Afghanistan for years to come. In just 10 days, the Taliban went from taking control of the first major city to arriving at the gates of Kabul. A sense of deep uncertainty gripped Kabul, so to reassure Kabul's residents, Ashraf Ghani's team posted a video on social media on the morning of August 15th, showing him discussing the city's protection with officials. Ghani was seen sitting at an ornate wooden desk talking to his minister on speakerphone. The video seemed to suggest that a negotiated deal with the Taliban was imminent and fighting in Kabul would be avoided. But on August 15th, it all changed. None of that was enough to reassure Ghani's ministers. Several high-level Afghan politicians headed to the airport to flee. The circle of aides around Ghani was getting smaller by the hour. By afternoon, President Ashraf Ghani and all his top officials fled, leaving the Afghan army and the police to fend for themselves and to fight for the people. A book that was on the desk during Ghani's morning video was still there, bookmarked to the same page. But now the Taliban were starting a new chapter. As the night drew in, Taliban milled about in the presidential palace. The world watched when the Taliban took down the Afghanistan flag in the palace wall, rolled it up and set it to the side. Outside the power corridors, the streets of the capital were gripped with fear and panic. There were queues outside banks as people rushed to get dollars out. There were queues outside the airport as thousands attempted to flee. Taliban fighters holding American rifles had taken over the streets of Kabul. All semblance of order had collapsed. For those in Kabul, the night was one of the longest they had ever seen.
Day one under the Taliban rule. How is Kabul reacting? We decided to take a drive around the city. Let's have a look.
In Afghanistan, inshallah, everything will be okay. But the people can continue their lives normally.
For the next few days, the city of Kabul had two contrasting faces. One with quiet streets, people hiding in their homes, fearing the Taliban. The other that the world was witnessing on their TV screens. On the morning of August 16th, queues outside the Hamid Karzai International Airport swelled. Thousands, including men, women and children, with their visa documents and passports gathered outside.
The way that you see behind me is leading to the Kabul airport. All roads leading are clogged and there is intense traffic. We're seeing that the Taliban are now out on the roads. They are controlling the affairs of the city practically. People are flocking in at the airport in a bid to secure themselves, in a bid to leave the country. But the Kabul airport currently stands closed for about 2 days.
Later that morning, desperate Afghans fearing for their lives overran the civilian terminal of the airport and gathered on the tarmac. The same day, on August 16th, the world witnessed a sight of desperation that it will never forget. A U.S. Air Force C-17 was seen taking off through the crowd. Many were seen running along the aircraft. Some tried to hang on to its wings and some to its underside. Several were crushed under the wheels. Those clinging to the wheels fell off to their death as the jet took off. With each passing day, more and more people were shot and trampled at the gates. They were tear-gassed and beaten by armed men, but the crowds only grew larger.
You see problem, whole of people of but Israeli country is very problem for the people in Afghanistan. Don't see visa, don't see coming harder.
Outside we have the Afghan defense forces, those who have not surrendered as yet, and the Taliban both. We're seeing intermittent firing, heavy use of gunfire over here.
On August 17th, WION's team attended what was Taliban's first official news conference after the takeover. The group struck a conciliatory tone and promised to respect rights of women. Vowed to form an inclusive government, announced general amnesty and urged people to resume normal life.
We want them to evacuate all foreign nationals by the 31st of August. And we are not in favor of allowing Afghans to leave.
Taliban's assurances were not enough for the Afghans. Thousands continued to jostle outside the airport. Helpless parents even handed over their children across barbed wires to the NATO forces inside the airport carrying out evacuations. On August 19, 2021, the Taliban declared the country as an Islamic Emirate. It had been over a week since the Taliban takeover, but the fear had not faded away. The desperation to escape the rule of the Taliban was still high. On August 26th, the United States and Britain issued an urgent warning, asking all its citizens to move away from the airport, citing an ISIS-K attack threat. And within hours, at 6 p.m. local time, 2 powerful bomb blasts struck the perimeter of the Hamid Karzai International Airport.
Let's go straight to Anas Malik, who is near the Kabul airport. Anas, what do you see around you and how bad does this look?
The first blast that took place outside the Abbey Gate, that is towards my left. The second blast took place where I'm standing at the Baron Gate.
Over 100 people, including 13 U.S. troops, were killed. The ISIS-K attack outside the airport was only the beginning of what would become the Taliban's biggest challenge during its initial days of administration. 3 days later, on August 29th, the United States carried out a drone strike inside the city. The U.S. claimed it was aimed at an ISIS terrorist. The next morning, WION's team went to the house that was hit by the strike.
Pretty gritty scenes. We've seen human flesh all over the place. The house has been greatly damaged. If my camera person can show you as well. This was the interior of the car. These are the remnants of the rocket that has been fired.
Weeks after this strike, the Pentagon admitted that the drone had killed 10 innocent people. 7 of them were children. The youngest child to be killed was a 2-year-old. August 30th brought an intensification of air traffic. C-17s, C-130s, fighter jets, and choppers climbed from the tarmac of the Kabul airport. And shortly before midnight, the skies in Kabul were all clear. All sounds of the aircraft tapered off. The silence was something that the city was not used to anymore. On midnight of August 31st, the last American soldier departed Afghan soil. Photographed using night vision optics, Major General Chris Donahue boarded a C-17, becoming the last American soldier to leave, marking a hurried end to America's 20 years of war in Afghanistan.
How does it feel? Today is the 31st of August. The deadline has ended. The occupation has also ended. Foreign forces have left. So what is your take on the matter?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. دا خو موږ لوی هدف چې شل کاله د دې لپاره سپیشلي مبارزه وشوه هغه د اشغال خاتمه وه.
The Taliban were celebrating the takeover.
We're entering the military side of the Kabul airport. Today is D-Day, when the Taliban are now ceased to have control over the entire country.
They called the withdrawal of foreign forces and the capture of the power corridors historic. But there was one province that the Taliban was yet to capture, the Panjshir Valley, where the National Resistance Front vowed to keep up their struggle against the hardline Islamists.
In the past few days, both the Panjshiri side and the Taliban have suffered major losses over here.
The Taliban was ready to take on the center of resistance. Fighting continued for almost a week. WION's team witnessed the fall firsthand. The Taliban ultimately imposed their rule on the last bastion of resistance, in the high peaks of the Hindu Kush. Celebratory fire echoed in Kabul. But the Taliban were unaware of the challenges that lie ahead. The people of Afghanistan are not the same as the Taliban left them 20 years ago. They had tasted freedom. They had lived a life of dignity with rights and liberties. In the 2 decades that passed, women had enjoyed a life that was unimaginable in the 1990s under the Taliban, and they were not ready to give it all up. As days passed, hurdles for the Taliban kept increasing. A victory was all that they had thought of. It had been a month since the takeover, but a plan for administration, a plan of how to run a country of nearly 40 million people, was nowhere in sight. The country began to plunge into an impending humanitarian and economic crisis. But the biggest challenge for the Taliban was yet to come forward. Its most formidable rival, the ISIS Khorasan. The ISIS-K soon staged a string of bloody attacks across Afghan cities. The first one came on September 18th in the city of Jalalabad. 3 separate Taliban vehicles were targeted in a series of explosions. It left 7 dead and over 30 injured. October 4th, the next attack was right in the heart of the capital city, Kabul. And the target was the city's second largest mosque, the Idgah Mosque. On October 8th, deadly suicide bombings hit a mosque in Kunduz during the Friday prayers. 60 people were killed and over 100 were injured. This was the deadliest assault since the US forces left. On October 15th, the ISIS-K attack had hit home. Kandahar, the birthplace of the Taliban, was targeted. On November 2nd, 400-bed Sardar Daud Khan Hospital, a military hospital in Kabul, was shaken after armed ISIS-K gunmen broke into the hospital grounds.
There's been an explosion. Behind me, you can see those fumes that are coming out from that's the Sardar Daud Khan Hospital. The road's been entirely cordoned off. It's been cleared. What we've heard are 2 explosions.
A fierce gunfight between the Taliban and ISIS-K terrorists was followed by 2 heavy explosions. 25 people were killed.
It's the 5th of November 2021, but it seems Afghanistan has now gone back to what it was 21 years ago. Hard-won gains are at risk. There is abandonment, anger, and despair. In the last 100 days here, I have witnessed thousands losing their lives. Men, women, children, activists, and journalists. Afghanistan is still far from stability. The Taliban say they have a government in place, but it's still not recognized by any country in the world. For those in power, the fight for legitimacy is still on, and for the ordinary, the struggle to rebuild a life continues. This is Anas Malik signing off from Kabul for WION The World is One.